Hi, last week I was traveling in Portugal and we were with a group of friends at this fancy restaurant and we were going to order wine. So when the waiter came, I told him, hey, we would like to have some red wine. We want it to be on the dry side and we wanted to have some structure and some acidity in it. The waiter pointed to the wine list and says, you should order the Douro Valley wine. And the wine came and it was exactly what I was looking for. So people around the table were asking, Marcy, what's the superpower you're using to order wine? And I told them this is not a superpower. It's just the fact that the waiter and I, we are sharing the same language. We share the framework used to describe something very complex, which is how does a wine taste when you drink it? And because we are using this framework, it was very easy for me to tell him what I was looking for, and was very easy for him to understand and to make a recommendation. My name is Marcio. I have been an engineer, entrepreneur, a CTO, and a director at Google. And I find that in all these roles, the use of common frameworks and mental models is the most powerful tool for effective communication and decision making. And what we're going to do today is I'm going to give you an introduction to these topics so that you can unlock your brain and be better at thinking faster and communicating smarter and use it in your work environment. So stay tuned and don't go anywhere. Hi, welcome to Careers Cast, and today we are going to talk about framework thinking. We are bombarded with pieces of data all the time, every day, and our brain is not very good at absorbing all of that. So, in order for us to absorb data, to absorb information, we need some structure. And the most common structure in human communication, in human cognition, is storytelling, right? So storytelling is another topic that's very important. It's not something we're going to talk about today, but storytelling is one of the possible structures that help our brain to absorb information and data. I started this video today telling you a story about ordering wine in a restaurant, and if you're still watching this video, it's because that story captured your attention, right, and drew you in to this video. So storytelling is a very important tool that you can use in communication, but it's more useful when you're trying to convey information to someone, right? And sometimes when you are trying to communicate in a business environment and you're trying to drive decisions, you're trying to frame a discussion, you're trying to lead a discussion to somewhere you want to go, or you want to communicate better, right? Then storytelling is not as efficient. And then framework thinking is the other type of structure you can bring to communication to help organize ideas, to think clearly, to provide focus, and to help the other person to think with you. I'm going to start with a very simple example that's easy to relate. Imagine that you have a long list of tasks at home, right? You need to do laundry, you need to go grocery shopping, you need to take the car for the car wash, you need to pay the bills, you need all those things. And you're discussing with your spouse, right? How are we going to prioritize all these things we need to do, right? And then one way of doing it, you just start saying, well, let's do this and this and this and this. And then your spouse is going to say, why that? Right? You're doing that only because you're interested. What about my interest? And that's very quickly going to escalate into an argument, right? So how do you avoid that sense of randomness, right? That sense of you're just picking things because you're interested in it, right? You can organize, you can create a framework, right, to help you to communicate with your partner and to sort through the priorities of the things you need to do. So, for example, you could say, well, let's organize our tasks into important and urgent framework, right? So, if it is important and urgent, we're going to jump on it and do it today. If it's important but not urgent, let's schedule to do it in the next week, right? If it's urgent but it's not important, we're not going to do it. We're going to delegate it to our kids so they'll take care of those tasks, right? And if it's not important and it's not urgent, let's just ignore it, right? So it's a very simple framework. It has 4 quadrants, right? Urgent, not urgent, important, not important. And if you start the conversation like that and you say, now let's say, well, washing the car is important, but it's not urgent. So let's do it later in the week, right? Grocery shopping is important and is urgent because the fridge is empty, so let's do it today, right? If you organize your prioritization of tasks that way and you communicate it that way rather than just picking things without explaining what's the rationale, right? Your spouse is not going to understand how you're making the selections, but once you set the framework, then it's much easier for the other person to accept your priorities, right? The priorities you're suggesting, but it's particularly important, right, to do that if you are trying to share that decision making with someone else, or you want to explain the other person how you're getting to the decisions you are getting to, or you want to tell them you decide, but I would like you to decide using these parameters, right? So you can tell how that can very quickly translate from something as trivial as a to-do list at home, right, to business priorities. And so this is a very quick, simple example of framework being used to facilitate decision making. Another thing that's important to notice is that in any business decision making environment, right, there are too many variables. A business is not a deterministic process, right? There is no algorithm that can tell you what's the right sequence of things, what's the right decision, what are the important things to pay attention to. So by definition, any any decision making in a business environment involves simplification, right? It involves trying to find what's the essence of the business and ignoring a lot of detail and focus on those things, right? So when you see a business presentation, when you present something to senior leadership, someone says, "Hey, provide us with a list of recommendations, right, to address these business problems." You know you're going to have to simplify, right? You know that the topic is too complex for you in a half an hour presentation to be able to to cover everything. So by definition, you're going to need to simplify. So a very common simplification method or framework, right, is the top three priorities. And you see this everywhere, right? YouTube videos. You're going to see people recording videos, and today I'm going to give you the top three things you need to think about. When they're doing that, they are setting a framework, right? They're saying there are 10,000 things. If you ask me what's the best way to have a successful career, there are 1,000 things I could talk about, right? But in order to synchronize us and to help us to think more clearly and to focus our minds, I'm going to say, let's talk about the three top things you need to do to have a successful career. First, you grab the attention of the person, you focus the person's attention, and then when you provide the three, right, the person's not going to be questioning, oh, what about that other thing? What about the other thing? No, I'm giving you the top three priorities, right? So framework thinking, framework communication is very important because it prevents the attention of other people to say, oh, but you forgot that and that and that. No, I'm just talking about the top three, and we should focus on the top three. So urgent important is one framework. Top three is another framework. I started this discussion with wine, right? How do you describe how does wine taste? It's a very complex topic, right? How are you going to describe how wine tastes? And then there is a framework, which is you talk about fruity or dry. You talk about acidity. You talk about structure or easy drinking. And there are a few parameters, right? And if you share those parameters, that framework in advance before you start describing the wine, it makes it much easier for you to communicate with the other person, even if the topic is as complex as what do you feel when you drink wine, right? So this is the essence of framework thinking. This is how it's used. It's used in presentations. If it's used in decision making. It's using just effective communication, right? So before you start saying things at random, right? Which is what we do when we are just having an informal conversation. When you're in a business environment, make sure you think, okay, this is a question. The best way to frame this topic? Is it the top three things? Is it urgent, important? It is along these three parameters. And, and and I hope this you're getting the essence of it. And I'm gonna give you a final example, right? If you're a company and you're selling products, right? The revenues of the company is a very simple formula, right? Is the unit price of the product times the number of units sold. Now let's say you're talking to your CEO, right? And the CEO comes and say, what are the suggestions you give us for us to increase revenues? And again, there are 1,000 things, right, you could do in the company to increase revenues. So how do you drive the discussion? How do you organize your ideas? And how do you separate where you want to focus on and things that you want to ignore? So you could start your answer, right, by saying, well, if you want to increase our revenues, there are two paths there, right? We can increase the number of units sold, or we can increase the unit price, right? Very simple. So I'm sharing a framework. Increasing the number of units is very difficult, right? You don't want to focus on that. You believe that the right way to increase revenues is to increase the price of the unit. So say we are in a market that is very static. We have a large market share already. So increase the number of units sold is very difficult. So let's put that aside. We can think about that later, but let's put that aside. I want to focus our attention in how do we increase the unit price, right? If we just arbitrarily increase the unit price, the customers are going to go to the competition, right? Because our price is going to be higher than the competition. So we need to increase the value of our product, right? The value our products deliver to customers. And this is how we can do it, right? We can do that by implementing this new feature that expands the value the product delivers to the customer. And we can then justify an increase in the unit price, or we can charge some extra amount of money for that feature. So the strategy I recommend is let's invest in product development, add this capability, and then increase the price, and that's eventually will generate more revenues, right? If you answer like that, you are sharing a framework, you are leading the other person right through your thinking process, and you have a much better chance, first of organizing your own ideas, right? But second, convincing the other person that this is the right way to go. The other way to answer that would be, well, I think we should just go implement some new feature in the product. And the person, why, right? Well, what's the point of doing that? I'm not talking about features. I'm talking about revenues. How do we increase revenues? So you bridge, right, your action with the desired outcome by sharing a common framework. So I hope this gives you enough for you to read more. And what I can tell you is that thinking frameworks, communicating frameworks, is one of the most important tools for communication and for decision making, not only at work, but in life. So I do recommend more research, and I'm gonna share a video here where I talk about career success. And if you pay attention, I use at least 3 frameworks during the video to help me convey what I'm trying to say as further examples of the use of framework thinking. So see you in the next episode of Careerscast.